Oi, Shin Megami Tensei fans.
Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne would never take advantage of our innate gullibility.
Why don't you play a real Shin Megami Tensei game like Nocturne or Strange Journey?
Over the summer, Nintendo put out a direct that made a lot of waves. E3 died this year, and the company has been more than radio silent. So when it turned out that Nintendo didn't have the major first-party reveals that people were hoping for, they got a little upset.
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin. This is serious. I know. This really is the world's smallest violin. See?
But let's be clear here, because this direct was insane. You may not know what this series is, but it's time that you learn. This is why Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is a big deal. We need to start with context, because how are we going to understand this game about angry skeletons without context? Alright, they're not actually angry, they're just assholes. Dude's not even registered. In the realm of the Japanese role-playing game, there's like a balance of power. We're all familiar with the rule of thirds. Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, bottom, top, and mid lane, arms, chest, and back, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything exists in sets of threes. For JRPGs, there are three major franchises that make up and define the genre. And those are Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Shin Megami Tensei. These are your ancient brands that were super influential from the start of gaming and continue to be today. You can trace back many other games in the subgenre to these three Tyrones of the Triumvirate. And while most people outside of the bubble are probably only familiar with Final Fantasy, understand that all three of these are cultural juggernauts of their own right. You could think of it like Call of Duty and Battlefield representing first-person shooters. So SMT is an important series, but it's also an elusive one. Yes, there is a ridiculous amount of spin-off games, but without getting too specific, there's functionally only 4 mainline games that have ever really been available outside of Japan. Just trust me, we're only going to count these ones, and these ones only come out once in actual human generation. SMT5 is definitely the more exciting part of this news, but that game isn't done yet, so there's nothing to talk about. What was surprising to me is that SMT3 Nocturne is now getting the spotlight with an HD remaster. The average person has no clue what this game is. However, to RPG nerds, this is a holy grail. This is how you separated yourself from the casual peasant trash.
Alright, we'll call it a draw.
Nocturne is literally the salty spittoon of JRPGs.
It'd be the line to get into the salty spittoon, the roughest, toughest sailor club ever to be built under the 7 seas.
Listen, kid, I think you'd be more comfortable over at that place.
Weenie Hut Juniors? Are you saying I belong at Weenie Hut Juniors?
Oh no, sorry. I was actually pointing to the place next to it.
Super Weenie Hut Juniors?
I think this is the right way to classify a game as being hardcore. It's not an inherent reflection on the game's quality, but rather to say that it's just harder to get into than a more casual experience you can pick up and play without having to think too hard. Because Nocturne wants you to think really hard and throw the controller really hard. Have you started to associate this game with being really? Some people are going to tell you that the difficulty is overrated, but the difficulty is not the point. It's that the game doesn't care if you suck. It's going to be on you to figure out how to win at the end of the day. It's not holding your hand, it's full of traps and other mischievous bullshit, and it just wants to fuck with you, like straight up. But at the same time, it's that bullshit that makes it kind of fun, right? It's the absurdity of the challenge you're facing that when you actually do manage to beat it, you feel like you did something pretty cool. So the deal with this boss is he gives himself more turns. Nocturne is this gateway into that hardcore side of the spectrum. Something that's more engaging for people who want a game that holds their decisions accountable. Oh man, this is starting to sound real familiar. What you need to know about turn press are two key details. Action points are a resource, and everything is symmetric. Like health or mana, your action points are this resource for physically taking your turn. Meaning if you have more points, you get to go more times. In a perfect world, you're using your points efficiently, paying only half the price by hitting enemy weaknesses. And you get to kill everybody, and everybody's happy. But this is not the perfect world. When you whiff, you end up losing twice your action points. And even worse, you end up looking like a fucking casual. Oof. But the cool part is that the enemies are playing by those same rules, leading to one of the fastest turn-based games I've ever played. Tempo will swing wildly if you're not prepared, and that extra risk makes buffs and debuffs very relevant. You would happily spend a turn raising your hit rate and chilling in a world where missing means death. I want you to consider this compared to a typical JRPG. You can mash through an ATB system, ignore most mechanics, like buffs, ignore status effects, and if you're still having trouble, you can always grind for levels. But by design, you cannot Ooga Booga Nocturne. I find that it's really easy to understand SMT as edgy Pokemon, because each monster has elemental types, and that's going to determine how you build your team. But the difference is that in Pokemon, these are your buddies that you probably want to ride or die with. And you can. You can roll up to the Rock Gym with Charizard, and let's be real, that type disadvantage doesn't matter, dude. Charizard's going to take Brock to Pound Town with or without you. Because once he's level 80, he's the trainer now. In Nocturne, my fire guy can actively become a liability. Doesn't matter how strong he is, doesn't matter what level he is. Whenever he gets hit with an ice attack, I'm always in trouble. Which is exactly when you fuse him into my dude Fornius. This one is more general to SMT as a series, but I love how flexible the party is allowed to be. You aren't bound by classes or roles. When you hit a wall, it's not about grinding for levels, but breaking down your team and rebuilding it into one that's right for the job. It's this puzzle game in motion, where you're constantly updating the party as basic encounters shift lineups. And with only 3 slots, you're constantly reacting and having to decide the most efficient team to move forward. And it's because of these aggressive mechanics that Nocturne has been cemented as a gold standard for turn-based combat. And it's easy to spot the influence even outside the franchise. Just look at a game like Bravely Default, which is obviously a Final Fantasy. Half the reason that game is interesting and works is because the battle mechanics are symmetric. Enemies can do almost everything you can. Nocturne obviously didn't invent this idea, but it helped popularize it, which is how any genre evolves over time as certain ideas fade in and out of popularity. And symmetric battle mechanics can be a disaster to design. Most RPGs don't bother trying to do this, and they don't need to. It's totally valid to build a system that just doesn't care about making each side equal, especially if it lets the player have more fun or do cooler shit. But the design philosophy of turn press is that extra impressive mile, which shows a lot of confidence in the dev's balancing and the player's own ability. Even within the series, Nocturne is the weird experimental one. It is basically the first time the series went third person, which compare what this looks like next to Strange Journey, which was SMT's traditional throwback after Nocturne's weird bullshit. This is a totally different take for the series that wasn't afraid to try new things, and it's really impressed me how many of those ideas stuck. This is required reading for the genre. This is a piece of JRPG history. And finally, Nocturne is getting the remaster that its contemporaries got years ago. Which, by the way, goddamn, that is a holy trinity. But beyond the history lesson, beyond the pretentiousness and gatekeeping skeletons, this is a game that holds up. It's a game that a lot of people missed, and it's a game I think a lot of people would like. So make no mistake, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is a big deal.